You're listening to KTWH. It is our 2021 Spring Fun Drive, and we've just been listening to an episode of The Tale Collector, the new episode for May 2021, produced by our stalwart at-home producer, Erica Adams. Welcome to your own show today, Erica, here on KTWH.
Thank you, Leo.
It's good to have you.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, it's good to have you aboard, and we're partnering you up with our other stalwart collector of tales or teller of tales, Tom Koehler. Tom, come on into the Zoom Playhouse with us.
Why, thank you for the invitation, Leo. I try not to be like a over-enthusiastic Labrador pup and stick my nose into everything once allowed in, so anytime you want me to shut up, just wrap me on the nose with a piece of newspaper.
If only that worked so well, Tom.
Yeah.
And I need to tell you folks, we can edit this out, that I've suddenly rediscovered a volume control that makes us all much more amplitudinous on the recording here. So we're
the technical term would be more gooder.
More gooder. We're all more gooder. So now let's resume back where we were when we were recording. Erica, you've been a tale collector on KTWH for quite a long time. I'm hoping to reacquaint ourselves with your start here and your interest in tales from all media. I think that's what distinguishes the tale collector, is you have a very open-ended view of what constitutes a way of people getting a story told to them. And I think it's pretty cool because we've matched you up with a guy who's from the old guard who kind of tells stories around a campfire as a primary kind of way of communicating. But with our fun drive going on, which, by the way, is the first spring fun drive we've had in 2 years, thank you, COVID-19, it's a chance for people to support the kind of alternative radio, I would say, that talking about stories on the radio, telling stories on the radio, and sharing information about the new forms of storytelling, it's not something you're going to hear on every station. So I'm going to have you and Tom talk a little bit about your adventures in radio as the tale collector. Take it away, Tom and Erica.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leo. Tom, always a pleasure to see you and hear you.
Oh gosh.
Yes. Well, I've been producing the Tale Collector since July of 2015. I started my blog just before that. I was not expecting this to be a radio show at all. Very pleasant surprise in retrospect. Long story short, I was at the Two Harbors Library donating a copy of my young adult novella, Allie's Adventure on the Wonder. And Michelle Miller, I'm sure many of you know, one of our best at KTWH. She was working at the library at that point, and she accepted the book from me. I was just leaving the library, and just because I was in no hurry at all, I was looking at a poster. The library was advertising a weekly kids movie, which happened to be The Aristocats. And just for fun, I was looking it over, just reminiscing, when Michelle called me back saying, "Hey, you forgot to sign the book." And so I went back in, and then we just got to conversing about my blog, my other writing endeavors. And I told her about my blog that I just started, and she was like, "Hey, that would be a good idea for a show. The rest is history," as the saying goes.
As the saying goes.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, you've had a very different route through the KTWH personnel files. You were early on at the very beginning of KTWH, the moderator or teller of tales on a show called Storytime, I think. Can you remind us of that?
Well, I guess in my case, I'd almost rather talk than eat. And I still have to deal with the embarrassment of speaking in public, but an episode happened to me in my junior year in high school at a rather large high school in Minneapolis, where at a National Honor Society induction, I did something that immediately caused the entire student body of around 1,100 students to burst into uproarious, rolling tears of laughter for a period of about 10 minutes. And of course, I was embarrassed, but I survived it and realized that, okay, you can continue to embarrass yourself throughout your life, but it will not end your life. So just go ahead and do whatever it is you're going to do. And so, as I said, I'd rather talk than eat. And the station needed some content, and it needed it cheap, and it needed it right away. And I had accidentally gotten my hands on a book called Politically Correct Fairy Tales. And it was a tongue-in-cheek take on classic fairy tales, but done in an over-the-top political correctness manner of speech. And I contacted the writer asking for permission, and that in itself was a long story. I got the permission, and so I read these stories and then taught myself how to use the editing software that we use for sound editing and production, and read those stories in a rather undisciplined way. We have strict time limits, a 15-minute window or a 30-minute window or whatever, not an 11-minute window or a 23-minute window. And so I read these stories and did them as well as I could, and it created some content, although a question comes up: if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, did the tree make a sound? And I had a similar question about my reading of stories on the air. If no one hears them, were the stories even told? And I decided, well, I didn't care. I'm gonna read them anyway. And I enjoyed it. I ran out of those stories, started getting into other stories, Mark Twain and a few others, classics, mostly from the 19th century, the very early 20th century because of copyright issues. And then decided that things which seemed humorous to me might fall flat on other listeners because of, my reading habits, I suppose. I finally kind of hit a wall. I couldn't find any more stories that were public domain that interested me, and I told the station I cannot honorably hold down this time slot anymore because I just could not find more stories. I enjoyed some O. Henry stories. I got through it, and the story time slot had come to an end. Now I'm just a general purpose freelance mouth, and when there's no talking to be done, I use my hammer and make sawdust and stuff like that for the station.
Well, for longtime listeners and continuing listeners, Tom, I think everybody has continued catching your stentorian tones delivering the end of the week edition of the News and Review with Kitty Mayo. And you've also made quite an impact as the Literally from the North Shore show rebooted this year after a long absence after Kay Anderson's stint. We started the show up again, a team of 7 people to produce what one person once produced. And I think you were the lead-off reader of the first novel that was selected, and we really relished that. It was really fun having you back telling stories on the radio, Tom.
Thank you very much. That's an encouraging thing to hear. I've finished reading another story. It's an epic poem about a cat named Bowser, who was actually kind of a special cat, a heroic cat who's observed and told in his own way the story and the history of Two Harbors through the tugboat Edna G, basically.
Oh, my.
Most cats, they're good for about 18 to 20 years tops. This cat has managed to observe the history of the town through the tug for over 80 years. And so this will be an epic poem told in 5 episodes as soon as I complete getting the appropriate permissions from the publisher and the copyright holder.
Wow. Well, stories are all about the era they're from, the people who told them, and who they were telling this story to with what goal in mind. There's so much to unpack when it comes to the history of story in the human race. And I got to turn the attention back, I think, Tom, to what Erica does on her program, which is not just first-person delivering intact stories, but trying to expose people to the whole range of stories out there. Erica, can you just describe for our listeners the way that you found stories embedded and delivered? I mean, there's kind of a new age and information age edge to some of what you have produced for us, what you've exposed us to, everything from the stories told in video games or anime to movies and song. You want to tell us about where you look for stories and why they speak to you and from all these different forms?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what really got me into stories as a whole was, I think it began when I was diagnosed with auditory processing disorder at around 16 months or so. So I had to learn different ways of, getting information and getting it to, stick with me, whether through writing, through visuals, things like that. And also just, it was just really tough on me when I was younger, just as far as being social, just, developing relationships with people. So stories were kind of a refuge for me, whenever I could find one that I could understand at least, because stories don't judge. They teach you what they have to teach without judgment. So, I found a lot of solace in that, as long as I wasn't forced to get in them, schools and everything. So a lot of books were better than others. But yeah, the point is, it's through all that experience, it taught me that, there are so many different ways of, not only getting information, but, that also pertains to storytelling as well. It may have begun with, words on a page, making books, but from the time TV was invented, when we started, interactive experiences, what we call video games now, like everything else, that relates to humanity, storytelling evolves. The way we tell stories, they evolve along with us and everything that we do. And I don't think, stories should be forgotten, just based on the medium that they're told in. For example, anime and video games, tend to have a sort of shoddy reputation among certain people, depending on who you ask.
Yes, you mean an upturned nose.
Yeah, something like that. And I get it. It's not for everybody. Not everyone grew up with video games. And I mean, with video games in particular, they do take some skill. I will admit that. I mean, to be fair, I grew up playing video games. Those are simply the forms. They're not, let me try that again. They're not, the stories themselves. They're like the portals, the means with which to get the information, with which to get the experience. Does that make sense?
Sure. Not being somebody who dabbles much in video games, I would be guessing that it's the context of the simulated world that we're thrust into to play this game, much of which I haven't experienced. But you do a fine job on your Tale Collector show to try to help the audience member feel themselves immerse into the context of that video game. It's something maybe I need to try out, but you've obviously tried to encourage people to expand their definition of story, and I think that's pretty amazing.
Right. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right story. Not every game is going to, or every show or whatever is going to be right for everybody. Sometimes not just with plot itself, but sometimes just, I guess, the way itself can be, very influential as far as an experience is concerned. Like, again, going back to video games, certain mechanics, certain things that you do in the game, sometimes that itself, rather than the visuals or the plot points, just like certain abilities that you have, that your avatar has, sometimes that alone can, really, make a difference with how one experiences the world that they're in. Again, does that make sense? Just certain artistic choices, can really...
Yes, just the word choice alone. Stories so much of the time are about choices and their consequences, and sometimes prequels to the choices to be made. You've just hit on an excellent way to pause the conversation, because we're coming to the end of the 15 minutes that we have on our Fundrive edition of the Tale Collector. We're going to pick up this conversation and have it appear in another forum on KTWH, perhaps on my Wednesday morning show. I do want to thank you guys for joining in on this part of the conversation. Tom, thank you.
Oh, sure, you bet.
Mm-hmm.
And Erica, we'll be back in that other format that is disconnected in time and space from this one, but I'd encourage everyone to go to ktwh.org if you appreciate our efforts to showcase storytelling from all cultures and times, and give us a donation that you can afford to help keep this kind of alternative radio going strong. ktwh.org, click the donate button on the homepage, and you'll see options for how you can help us along in our Spring Fund Drive 2021. Signing off for now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, folks.
Thank you, everyone.